The Downtown Rams podcast is brought to you today by Draft. Looking for the best fantasy sports site on the planet? Sign up with Draft today. For a limited time only, our listeners will receive $3 matching their first deposit of at least $10. Use promo code DTR or visit draft.com/DTR to sign up now. Draft. Fantasy for the people. Now enjoy the show.
Caught by Brandon Cooks. Shoot your arrows. Cooper Kupp plucks it out of the air and gives the Rams the lead. Robert Wood, touchdown. LA! Ball goes crashing into the end zone. Aaron Donald almost beat the football there. Corey Littleton, have yourself a day. Picked off. Marcus Peters coming off the edge, and Ryan will be wrapped up by Clay Matthews. Everett in stride. Wow!
Franklin Myers gets his hand down there.
Leno got a hand on it. Did he pick it? He did! Racing down the sideline is Akeem Talib. Gurley for MVP! Touchdown LA! Picked off by John Johnson. Well, it's Dante Fowler who is able to get to breathe. Greg Zuerlein sends the Rams to the Super Bowl! LA will play for the Lombardi!
Welcome back, guys, to another Downtown Rams podcast. It's episode 256. I'm your host, Jake Ellenbogen. Joining me, as always, is Alexis Kraft, and we have a special guest from the Draft Network, NFL Draft Analyst, Jordan Reid. How's it going, Jordan? Thanks so much for coming on.
It was great. Thank you guys for having me on. Really excited to be here.
Yeah, of course. We're so excited to talk to you and to get this thing rolling. I just want to ask you, what are your thoughts on the NFL right now? Like, what to you is the hottest topic when it comes to the NFL right now?
I would say the backup quarterback dilemma, and there's so many teams with backups in right now, even with the reigning MVP, Patrick Mahomes, going down. We've seen just how some guys have to be ready throughout the league, and we've seen some rookies step in and do a really good job as well. Kyler Murray is one guy that stepped in and done really well. Daniel Jones is another that's been up and down so far this season, but Eli Manning started out the year. So I think the backup quarterback story is probably the biggest thing going on right now, even in Carolina with Cam Newton. We've seen Kyle Allen step in and done a decent job, even though he looked really bad last week against the 49ers. But prior to that point, I thought he looked really well for the most part. And then you go to other teams like Atlanta. Matt Moore had to step in, or Matt Schaub, I should say, had to step in last week and get the job done there. So we're just seeing how vital the backup quarterback role is for all of these teams so far. So I think that's the biggest storyline so far.
Oh, yeah, definitely. I think it's been a lot of fun, obviously, seeing guys like Daniel Jones get their shot, Gardner Minshew, and, hopefully some others. Really bummed that Drew Lock isn't out there. We are a big fan of his. So, going into that, what are your thoughts on the Rams? This is a Rams podcast. Obviously, they're 5-3. They're not 8-0 like last year. Things haven't gone quite the same as last year, but it looks like they're somewhat coming around as they enter the bye week. But what are your overall thoughts on the Los Angeles Rams in 2019?
I think it's been a really up and down season for them so far. You start out with 3 straight wins against the Panthers, Saints, and Browns. I believe it was. They start out with a 3-game win streak, and then they come back with a 3-game losing streak. And they had the weird game against Tampa Bay where it was a shootout in that game that nobody was really expecting. And then they lose the heartbreaker to Seattle. And then the 49ers, who are really rolling right now. And then they beat up on the Falcons and Bengals the past few weeks. So I thought it's been an inconsistent season for the most part, but everyone knows that the Rams are very talented. They have a very talented defense, I would say, just because Aaron Donald, of course, he's in the middle, and everyone knows how much attention he does command, and the offense is very explosive. Cooper Kupp is having an outstanding year even last week where he had 200-plus receiving yards. So I think it's been an inconsistent season for the most part, but I think they're hitting their stride here at midseason going into the bye week. And I expect them to come out the bye week very strong just because they're coming out playing some teams that are really struggling right now. The Pittsburgh Steelers, we know they almost lost to the Miami Dolphins on Monday Night Football a couple of days ago. The Bears are really struggling right now. And then they play the Ravens after that, which is a very tough opponent. And then they come back after that with the NFC West showdown with the Cardinals. So they're going to have a chance to come out strong after this bye week. So they're sitting at 5-3 right now, but looking a couple of weeks from now, they could be sitting up and be 8-3. So I wouldn't get too discouraged right now if you are a Rams fan. I know this is a Rams podcast. I'm not being biased or anything like that. I'm giving a true unbiased opinion, and I think this team is going to be just fine. It's just ironing out some of the kinks that they do have right now.
No, yeah, for sure. And, the Rams obviously had kind of like a really rough 3-game patch, and then they traded for Jalen Ramsey. We traded away our first round pick this year and next year, and another draft pick. I mean, what were your thoughts on that trade?
I love it. And we've seen how Les Snead is very aggressive with all these trades. I believe they don't have a first-round pick going on 5 years now. So he doesn't really care about these draft picks. And we see a lot of fans, per se, really overvalue these draft picks. And Les Snead is a guy that doesn't really do that just because he doesn't really care about them. Honestly, he believes in being able to build his roster the way he wants to build it, and that's really through free agency and some of the picks that they do have in later rounds. But whenever you get a chance to get an elite talent like Jalen Ramsey getting in a Wade Phillips defense, I think it's really a match made in heaven. We've already seen the type of impact that he can have on this defense already. So I'm a fan of the trade that they did make, and I think that even though it's a steep price per se, but I think for the type of talent that he can be or he has shown to be to this point, I think it was very fair value.
Yeah, I definitely agree with you there, and I think, it's almost like you have to look at it. Yes, you may get, a top 5 talent at corner, but in the draft, I mean, what are you hoping for? That he's better than Jalen Ramsey? Like, I mean, that's as good as it really gets.
Right.
I mean, maybe you get a little bit better, but, I mean, now you're talking like Deion Sanders level, so, I mean, that's just not very likely. So, I totally agree with you there. With that being said, the Rams won't pick in the first round. So, I mean, obviously, you have your pros and you have your cons. It's the 5th year in a row that they haven't picked in the first round, and we're getting used to it, so it's not a huge deal. So who would you, if you were the Rams GM and you didn't make that move, which it sounds to me like you would probably make that move if you were the Rams GM because you like the move. But, hypothetically, you're the Rams GM. You didn't make the move. You kept the pick. Who are you targeting for the Rams in 2020?
Well, of course, I think you have to go cornerback, and I know they've traded Aqib Talib already, and then Marcus Peters, they shipped him off as well. So cornerback definitely was going to be a huge need for this team, even if they did keep both of those guys. And luckily, this is a very strong draft class at cornerback. And I think they were going to have their pick of the litter, even if they did keep that first-round selection. Now, they're not going to be in range to get guys like Jeffrey Okudah, Paulson Adebo, or any guys along those lines. I don't think they would be in that range just because those guys are probably going to be top 15 picks. And with the Rams pick, I assume it's going to be top or 25 to 32 range. I think that's a fair range for them. And you're talking about guys along the lines like A.J. Terrell, C.J. Henderson, Jalen Johnson. I think those are some fair names for them in that range. So cornerback would definitely be an area that I would address, and also edge rusher is another area that I think they do have some weaknesses right now, even though Dante Fowler is a guy that they spent some draft capital on to get from the Jaguars last year. I still think they need another edge rusher opposite of him. So edge rusher definitely will be another area that I would try to address. And then you're talking about names like Julian Okwara, Jabbar Zuniga, and some other names along those lines that I think they could be in range for in the back half of that first round.
Yeah, I definitely hear you there. I'm a big fan of C.J. Henderson, and unfortunately, obviously, that won't be a possibility because I think he is a surefire first-round pick, and I don't really see the Rams having the opportunity to grab him. With that being said, the Rams do have a second and third round pick for now. We'll see what they do with that. But who would you be targeting, in that range realistically? And this actually helps because this is what we're looking at right now. The state of the Rams, who are you targeting in the second and third rounds?
So there's a few guys I do have circled for them. His name is Curtis Weaver from Boise State. Now, I think he's trending upwards right now, so he could be a back of the first round type of guy, but he also could be an early second round selection. But right now, I think he probably would go somewhere in the late second round, right where the Rams would be selecting right now. He's had the quietest season of any edge rusher so far. What I mean by that, I mean it in a good way. He has 9.5 sacks already this year, and you wouldn't even know about it just because all you're hearing about is Chase Young, K'Lavon Chaisson, and A.J. Epinesa. Those are really the top three guys right now that you're really hearing about. But Curtis Weaver definitely is one name to keep an eye on. Another one may be Jonathan Garvin from Miami, and also Carlos Basham from Wake Forest. That's another name definitely to keep an eye on. And the last one that I would like to mention is Terrell Lewis from Alabama. Now, he's been a bit banged up. He only played 10 games in 2 years prior to this point, but he's having a breakout season for Alabama this year, and he really fits the Wade Phillips style of attacking defense.
Yeah, definitely. He's a guy that I've watched as well and who I really like and who I think is, as weird as it sounds because he plays for Alabama, is somewhat underrated and kind of overlooked. But all right, so the Rams drafted Joseph Noteboom, David Edwards, and Bobby Evans over the last 2 years. I mean, you've got Whitworth likely retiring after this year. So is there really like a true starting caliber left tackle on the roster to replace him, or do you think we should draft one next year?
I still think they should draft one, even though it seems like they like Noteboom to this point. We know Whitworth probably is going to play maybe a year or two longer. We're not really sure about that. He might surprise us and retire this year just because of his age. We don't really know what he's going to be to this point. But Bobby Evans and David Edwards are definitely two, I think, promising guys, but I just don't think they're going to end up being those high-end starters that you trust to protect the blind side of Jared Goff. I don't think either one of those definitely fit that type of zone scheme type of system that Sean McVay likes to run. They're more of a vertical, a power offensive line type of offensive lineman that like to get vertical push. But if you're looking to draft an offensive tackle in the second round, you're talking about guys like Lucas Niang from TCU. He's one that definitely would appeal to Sean McVay and Les Snead just because he's in that zone scheme in TCU that they like to run there, and I think he'll be a match made in heaven. Also, another one could be Hakeem Adeniji from Kansas. I think he definitely could be a fit there. And another one is Calvin Throckmorton from Oregon, who's getting a lot of love in scouting circles right now. So if you're looking to take one in the second, third, or even the fourth round, I think any of those guys could be viable options.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Niang. Was hoping he was going to come out last year, and Hakeem Adeniji I see plenty of because I'm actually a Kansas Jayhawk fan myself, and
Nice.
hoping he ends up getting to the Senior Bowl because I think it'd be a perfect opportunity for him to showcase what he brings to the table. So I like that you mentioned that. Of course, Throckmorton from Oregon. I think those are definitely some great names. Really quickly, I do want to get your thoughts on Prince Tega, I don't even know how to say his name, from, I believe, Auburn. I'm so bad with his name. Wanago?
You're not the only one.
Because they're people, here's the thing. Athleticism, that build, you fall in love with. But at the same time, Auburn, Greg Robinson, people don't love... Rams fans don't love that whole,
right.
So what is your take on him? Do you think he could be a legit left tackle for the Rams in 2020 if need be?
I do. And the first thing I will say for fans that do have those Greg Robinson flashbacks, you have to remember to just scout the helmet or scout the last name, not the helmet. And what I mean by that is you have to be able to separate some of these guys from the actual schools that they're at and the position that they play. And I know it's a different position and I know it's a different player, but that was a prime example of what happened with Patrick Mahomes and him being a Texas Tech quarterback and some of the bad players that they had coming to the league in previous years and why so many misevaluated Patrick Mahomes with Graham Harrell and some of the other guys that they had coming out of that school. And you just have to be able to separate the player from the actual school that they are playing for and with the position as well. And that's what you have to do with Prince Tega Wanogho. And he is a very, very talented player, but you have to understand that he is still a bit raw in a sense. And he has it all figured out as a pass protector, but as a run blocker, he's still trying to figure out that phase of the game. But as we've seen in years past with Colton Miller, Andre Dillard, and guys of that nature along those lines, teams are going to draft these athletic offensive tackles very early just because pass protection is something you can't necessarily teach in the offensive line. Either you have it or you don't, but you can mold them into being that type of run blocker that you want them to be. And that's what teams are going to see with Prince Tega Wanogho. And he has a really interesting story. And I actually wrote a story about him last weekend. So go check that out on the Draft Network. It is very, very interesting. But just to quickly run through that, he was only a swimmer when he got here. He actually grew up overseas in Trinidad and Tobago, which is where his family is from. And he moved here in 2014, I believe it was. And what happened with him was he just randomly ran a 40 after school one day when he was 17 or 14 years old, I should say. And he ran somewhere in like the low 4.6s, which is crazy to think with his size at 6'6", 300 pounds. So you can just imagine how much those coaches were really salivating over him and wanting to get him on the football field after he ran a 4.6 at the time, 6'4", about 275 pounds. and that's when he was wearing the size 17 shoe. So he's a big guy, as you can see. But he's going to have a lot of fans in league circles, and he already does. And Auburn seen that talent, they offered him immediately, and it's been all she wrote after that. And I think he's going to end up being a first-round selection. But if he doesn't, if he slips for some reason, I definitely think he may be an option for the Rams in the second round.
Yeah, definitely. And, definitely very talented player. And, with this draft coming up, we have a lot of people on the Rams who might potentially, be gone and might need to be replaced. So, just Jake and I are going to name a couple players that we could lose in free agency. And if you could just tell us who would best replace them in this draft, that would be really helpful. I mean, linebacker Corey Littleton. I mean, if we lose him, is there anybody in this draft who you think could replace him?
Yeah, and there's plenty of names in this draft. Even though it's not a very strong linebacker class, I think there's some viable names that could replace him. And you're talking about some guys like Shaq Quarterman, I think could be a viable option in those mid-rounds. Kenneth Murray from Oklahoma, even though his name is trending upward right now. And a guy named Patrick Queen from LSU. So there are some viable linebackers in this linebacker group, but there isn't really a headliner, especially after Dylan Moses suffered that torn ACL or prior to the season this year. So there's going to be some mid-round options for those guys that the Rams are trying to replace, but they may not be those high-end types that you're looking to step in and contribute right away, but down the line, maybe in the second or third year, or as they get closer to the expiration date on their rookie deals, that they could end up turning into those starters that you're looking for.
Yeah, you mentioned Dylan Moses, and oh man, I think Chase Young's probably my number one player in this draft. I think he's everyone's at this point, but I would probably say Dylan Moses is number two, and I really feel for him with that injury, and part of me selfishly is hoping he falls to the second round, but I just don't see it. I think this is somebody that's probably still going to go in the top 15. But with that being said, Dante Fowler Jr. is an interesting one because the Rams, they make the trade for him. His rookie year, he tears his ACL, I believe, and is unable to obviously compete his rookie year, and then kind of gets behind the eight ball, and then you have your Yannick Ngakoue, and you have Calais Campbell, and they bring in all these different guys, and all of a sudden he kind of gets phased out of Jacksonville. Rams get him. He's a huge focal piece, on their defense to bring them to the Super Bowl. And this year he's been the really big key pass rusher. So with that being said, unfortunately, I don't think the Rams are going to be able to bring him back because I think he's pricing himself out of their range. But where do you see or who do you see in this draft that could replace Dante Fowler? I know you mentioned Curtis Weaver out of Boise State. I'm a huge fan of his, but I see him trending in the first round. But who do you see replacing Dante Fowler Jr.?
Yeah, and there's a few guys. Jonathan Greenard from Florida. That seems to be kind of the undersized type that the Rams really like. He's about 6'3", about 260 pounds, more of a tweener. But I think he fits that attacking style of defense that Wade Phillips likes to run very well. He's a transfer from Louisville. He's now at Florida. He's having a real breakout season there. He's battled some injuries this year, but if you go back and watch the Miami game, the very first game of the season, I think he had a really terrific game during that contest. Darrell Taylor from Tennessee is another name that could be a viable option. And also Kenny Willekes from Michigan State. He's also another undersized guy, about 6'3", 260 pounds as well, that I think could be a viable option in that second or even the third round as well. And then the last one I'll talk about is Alton Robinson from Syracuse, the same exact size of Willekes and Taylor. And I think he's a bit more explosive than those other two. And I think he has a bit more upside than those guys as well. So you definitely could probably get him in the second round.
Yeah, and what about potentially replacing defensive tackle Michael Brockers?
Yeah, this is a really fantastic defensive line group. And you're talking about the headline of guys like Derek Brown and Neville Gallimore and Javon Kinlaw. I think those are probably the top three interior guys right now. But the second-tier guys, you're talking about Raekwon Williams, Rashard Lawrence, and some other guys. Leki Fotu is another one that scouts really like a lot. So this is a very high-end type of interior defensive line class. And Marvin Wilson is another name from Florida State that's trending in the right direction as well. So if they want to replace Brockers, I think they're going to have their pick of the litter. It's just a matter of when they want to pick their guy, whether that's the second, third, or even the fourth round, even if they want to go all the way on day 3. I think there's going to be some viable options there as well.
Yeah, now we move into back into the trenches. Austin Blythe, right guard. He had a really good first 11 games last year and then fell off and has not been the same this year. Some say he's playing with an injury. Some just believe he's just not very good. Regardless of your take on Austin Blythe, how do you see, or who do you see in this draft the Rams replacing him with?
Now, on the flip side, this is the one position group I should say that really isn't that strong this year after it being a really strength of the draft class last year. I think it's the flip or the reverse of that with this class. It's just not a very strong interior offensive line class. But if you want to get into some guys that could end up replacing Blythe, you're talking about Zach Shackelford from Texas, who's had a really good year this year, Jake Hansen from Oregon, Nick Harris from Washington, and also Darrell Williams from Mississippi State. I think those guys are some viable names that could end up replacing Blythe, but I just think it's going to be really hard to replace his production, especially with how he played last year, even though he's regressed back to the mean in a sense this year, whether he's battling an injury or just he hasn't been very good this year, and if this is just really who he is. So we'll see if they do end up trying to replace him or just trying to bring him back. But regardless, I think they'll have their options of what they want to do if they do want to replace him.
Yeah, definitely. And, last guy here is Blake Bortles. I mean, Blake Bortles could easily not be a Ram next season. And once he's gone, I mean, the Rams, other than Jared Goff, they have no depth at the quarterback position. Is there any guy, in this upcoming draft that you think could easily, replace Blake Bortles on this Rams team?
Yeah, so if you're looking for a backup quarterback, I think you have to go later on down the line. And you're talking about Steven Montez from Colorado, Nathan Stanley from Iowa. But I think this is a very top-heavy quarterback class. Even KJ Costello from Stanford is another guy that could go early on in day 3. But I think it's going to be slim pickings, especially after you get through the top guys. Of course, we all know Tua, Joe Burrow, Jake Fromm, Jordan Love, Eason, and all those guys. We all know those names. I don't think the Rams are going to be in contention to pick any guy that early just because they signed Goff to the massive extension. They're not going to bring an early quarterback draft pick in just for obvious reasons. So you're talking about Costello. Kellen Mond is another name that could be a possibility. Stanley, as I mentioned, and even Montez if they're looking for an undrafted free agent in a sense. But it's going to be interesting to see what they do to replace Blake Bortles if they do end up not bringing him back.
Yeah, I definitely agree there. I think I actually want to get your quick thought because, as I mentioned, I am a Kansas Jayhawk fan. Is Carter Stanley going to, at any point, get a chance to maybe do what Devlin Hodges is doing in Pittsburgh?
That's a really interesting question. And he's a guy I have to do some more work on, honestly, just because I haven't done a huge deep dive on him, but I have seen small glimpses of him, and I think he is very talented, but I think I need to do a little bit more work on him just to give a true, honest assessment about him, and I don't want to put any bad words or anything like that about him just because I've only watched about 3 games on him so far.
No worries, man. I appreciate it because I'll be honest with you, I wasn't totally cool with them starting him. I actually liked the other kid, McVitie, a lot, but he's really looked good. And, of course, Devlin Hodges has come on our show before, so, we're a big fan of what he's done and, hoping he gets another shot. But with that being said, here's the thing. With Rams fans, it's really Todd Gurley. Do you keep him? Do you not keep him? The contract, it's kind of crazy, right? Because, this guy had 40 touchdowns over the last 2 years. He's still been somewhat productive this year, based on how few carries he's gotten. What would you do with Todd Gurley? Because, again, many Rams fans are looking at his long-term health and are, honestly wanting out of his contract. Where do you, fall in that?
I'm just going to be honest with you guys. I'm just not a huge fan of paying running backs, I should say, just because it's such a disposable position. And we've seen guys be mid to late round draft picks and really step in and have success. And I'm a big fan of the guy that drafted last year in the third round and Darrell Henderson. And I think he showed some flashes so far this year. And of course, he doesn't have the production that Ty Gurley has had in previous years, but I think he can be a viable option in this spread system that Sean McVay really runs, just because he had a lot of success in that same type of system last year at Memphis, and he's known for his explosive runs, and he's going to have a lot of opportunities in this offense. And I think he can create, maybe not as high-end or as effective as what Gurley did during his heydays, but I think he can give you 75 to 80% of the production that Ty Gurley did give when we were seeing him at his best. So I would be looking to get out of the Gurley deal, and I know that might pain some Rams fans, but I'm just going to be honest about the situation, especially with the team that's really pinching for some cap space, I should say, right now. Just getting out of that deal, I think, would help them a bit in a sense, and I think Darrell Henderson is a guy that could take over that role. And if you draft another back to go alongside with him, you have two guys on a rookie deal, and you're saving a lot of money in that area as opposed to giving a bunch of your salary cap to a running back at such a disposable position.
Yeah, a lot of people, like we said, have been talking about it. It's kind of been, I guess you could call it a debate among Rams fans, especially on Twitter. A lot of people feel a lot of different ways about it. And like you mentioned, we do have Darrell Henderson. He's a guy that I like a lot. I know Jake likes a lot as well. A lot of Rams fans do. So, with him coming onto the team, it definitely increases kind of the sentiment about Todd Gurley. But, Brandon Cooks is another question mark, kind of like his Wes Welker-like concussion problem. I mean, if he has to retire at the end of this season, would you, if you were the Rams, would you look at maybe adding another receiver in the draft, or would you stick with Josh Reynolds and Mike Thomas?
I would probably look to add another guy just because I think Reynolds, I was a big fan of him coming out, but we just don't really know what he is at this point, even though he has shown some flashes. And I would take advantage of this loaded wide receiver class. And if they're looking for a guy that can attack down the field, you're talking about Denzel Mims from Baylor, who definitely could be a viable option. Colin Johnson from Texas is another one that could be an option. And Devin Duvernay from Texas, if they're looking for a guy that can take the top off the defense. In a sense, I think they're going to have a plethora of options in this draft. It's just a matter of exactly what they want to do. And if Cooks ends up coming back, or if he does retire, we'll see what does happen with that situation. But I definitely would draft another guy.
Yeah, I seem to agree with you there. I was looking at receivers because I think, this Brandon Cooks thing is very worrisome to me. I think the concussion thing is very similar to Wes Welker, and at some point you have to kind of take away from, I'm a fan of his, to, realizing, hey, look, this guy is going to have some severe long-term issues if he, continues suffering concussions. He still is already probably going to. So I think it's a legit possibility that, we could not have Cooks. And I really like the guy you mentioned, Mims. I like Michael Pittman Jr. from USC. I like Marquez Stevenson from Houston and Antonio Gandy-Golden from Liberty. I think, getting a deep threat, getting somebody big like that would be a lot different than having Cooks. But, with that being said, I do want to get your thoughts on the Jared Goff extension. Do you agree with the way the Rams are approaching the future, following this Jared Goff extension, already getting the ball rolling, trading away Peters and trading away Talib? What are your thoughts on all of that?
I think they were in a really tough situation just because I think we know who Jared Goff is at this point, but of course with the money that was shelled out to him, everybody is going to go crazy over it just because quarterbacks are expensive. And we were so used to Goff being on his rookie deal that it came as a bit of I would say overpay, but overreaction just because of how much money they gave him, especially following the Russell Wilson and also the Carson Wentz extension. And that really set a baseline for his price. And I think he got $134 million, I believe it was, or something along those lines. So he got really big money. But I'm a fan of Jared Goff. I think he's very underrated, even though he was the top overall pick. I think as long as he has a partnership with Sean McVay, I think he's going to be fine. But if somehow that partnership ever does break up, I think we're going to see kind of some of his warts, in a sense, really rear their heads. Maybe not as severe as what we saw when Jeff Fisher was there. But I think as long as he stays attached hip to hip with Sean McVay, I think could be just fine, just because that is his security blanket in a sense, and I think their partnership really works really well together, and I think this offense can be very explosive, just a matter of him being consistent all the time, and I think that's his biggest issue to date. If he's able to maintain that consistency, I definitely think he continues to be a top 15 quarterback in the league.
Yeah, definitely. And, lastly here, if you can make any changes, additions, subtractions, tweaks with the way that the Rams built their roster, what would you do?
Ooh, that's a really good question. I probably would have addressed corner a bit earlier than what they did. I don't think they took it as seriously as they should have last year. I think they should have drafted a cornerback much earlier than what they did. Even though I did like the Taylor Rapp selection last year in the second round, I probably would have went corner there just because I probably would have planned ahead for Marcus Peters and Aqib Talib really to not be on the roster following this season, just because we knew with Talib contract expiring and then Marcus Peters also expiring as well. I don't think they planned properly as far as what they wanted to do at corner, even though I was a big fan of David Long in the third round. But I thought maybe with that second round pick, they probably should have taken a corner there. So I would have addressed corner a bit earlier, even though I like the Taylor Rapp and the David Long selections. I just think I would have had a more viable option. And, of course, hindsight is always 20/20. Now if they have Jalen Ramsey, all of that is out the window. But I just would have addressed corner a bit earlier than what they did.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with you there. There was definitely a lot of guys that, we were looking at, Greedy Williams falling in the second round, Justin Lane. I mean, pretty much every corner falling in the second round, right? I don't think any corner went in the first because, what's his face? Byron Murphy, he went 33rd.
Yeah.
And then you see, obviously the value when you go down the draft and you see guys like Amani Oruwariye, going in the fifth round. It's like, was he worth, a third round pick? David Long, I guess, we'll find out in time. I think Troy Hill is playing a lot better than, many of us expected. He's really started to lock it down. So, we'll see about that. And they did sign him to a 2-year deal. But I completely agree with you. And I think, obviously, making the tough decision to trade away Aqib Talib, and giving up a fifth round pick with it, it is going to open up the door to potentially bring Ramsey his contract this year, potentially. So, we'll see about that. But one last thing before you go, I want to know how many times, Jordan, that you get mistaken for Jordan Reid on Twitter, the tight end.
So there's two Jordan Reids I always get mistaken. Well, two Reids I get mistaken for. It's Jordan Reid, the Redskins tight end, and also I believe his name is Justin Reid from ESPN. He's a guy that works for the Undefeated. I'm sorry if I butchered his name, but he's another. But his name on Twitter is J Reid ESPN. So somehow Redskins fans always get me mixed up with him and also Jordan Reid, the tight end, and it happens every day. It's gotten to the point where I don't know if people are being serious or if they're just taking it as a joke or being it as a joke. So it's gotten, I don't want to say irritating. I just take it as all fun and games at this point now. But it was a bit irritating at first, but now it's all fun and games and a joke.
Yeah, I can imagine that there'd be a lot of mix-up there. But, thank you so much for coming on, Jordan. Jake and I obviously love your work. We love the Draft Network and all that you guys do. So it was really, fun to pick your brain. Thank you guys for having me on. It was a pleasure.
Oh, absolutely, Jordan. Anytime, and hope to see you in Mobile.
Definitely will.
All right, you take care.
All right, you too.